Hello everybody, welcome back to the Old Warlock. I'm Alex, and this is Jim. And today we thought that we would talk to you a little bit about getting outside. And not only about getting outside, but how getting outside can help you not only be a better player in Dungeons & Dragons, but also be a much better DM.
One of the things that a DM must have the ability to do is vividly describe where his players or her players are actually campaigning. And it's one thing to be able to say, yeah, you're in a forest and there are a bunch of trees around. It's another thing to have in your mind an image of a forest and actually what the reality is. So if you look around here, you can see really clearly that this is not an easy place to move through. Now granted, not all forests are like this, but as a DM, you should have in your head the understanding that forests differ.
A forest is not a tree farm. And for those of you who have never seen a forest, like he said, you might not understand that you have to step over logs and that there aren't paths everywhere and that it's tough to traverse, you know?
And moving silently through a forest like this is next to impossible. And so that makes a character who actually has those abilities that much more special. But for a character who doesn't have those kinds of abilities, it can have a real strong impact in how an adventure plays out. Because trust me, if you look around here, you can see that this is a place that you're not going to move through quietly.
Now imagine that if you're trying to climb over this stack of logs over here, for instance, you have on full plate armor, you're carrying a sword, you're carrying a spear, you're carrying a shield, all kinds of things. It's going to be mighty tough to climb over all this stuff, especially quickly. If you're in a rush, you're going to trip over things. You're going to bang your noggin against some of these trees. And that is just another thing that serves to make your campaign much more realistic.
And if you're trying to do said moving through the forest at night, then you're going to have all kinds of interesting things because there are a lot of long things hanging down from dead trees that you might impale your head on. Trust me, I've done this kind of thing, not in a D&D adventure, but in reality. So we're going to go through the forest that we find ourselves in today. We're going to point out a number of different things that maybe you've never had the opportunity to see in reality. Point out a few things that you might want to integrate into your campaign based on our experience out here in the forest today.
Yes, but alongside that, just go outside. You're probably near some sort of state or national park. It's important that all of you go out and experience the wonders that nature has to offer. So that's a point of this video as well.
Yes. If you don't have a national park nearby, we're very lucky, we have quite a few, but if you don't have a national park nearby, I'm sure there's a state park. Maybe even some areas of large city parks will have areas of not wilderness, but some natural areas where you can go
have trees.
And where you can go and get a better understanding of what it's like for someone to be outside and have a better idea of what to tell your players when you're playing.
What he said.
Anyway, let's move on and let's take a look at some other things here in the forest that you might find of interest that might change the way that you describe environments to your players in your game.
So, while you're going through your campaign, some of you might be under the impression that your characters are traveling mostly along well-maintained roads, even if they're on a path or something like that, when in reality, they might look more like this. At some hard angles, traveling up a mountain, soft dirt underfoot while they're wearing armor, things reaching out over the road that they might knock their head against.
One of the things to keep in mind is that this can actually be exhausting when you're not wearing armor. If you are wearing armor and you're trudging up and down hills and inclines like this, it can really be tiring and it's going to take away a lot of your energy for things like fighting.
And I know that this might be tough for some of you to embrace, but there are going to come times when you have to take your armor off.
Put it on your pack mule or whatever else and have it hauled for you as you get from point A to point B, because you'll be too exhausted when you get to your destination to use it or to fight in it if you don't conserve your strength by having your armor carried on your behalf.
You can say, look at me, look at me, look at me. Plate armor is not something that you wear 24/7. Let me just say this. It was never worn 24/7. It was put on for very specific circumstances when you knew that there was going to be a big battle or a fight or something. But most of the time, you're not going to be wearing any armor at all. You're just going to be traveling. So just remember that. I know it's hard to get through your noggins.
And that even goes for things like chainmail, which everybody thinks that you can just wander through the countryside in. Yeah, people were in very good shape. They were used to moving about in that kind of armor. But at the same time, after an entire day in it,
it's incredibly heavy.
It is very heavy. We know because we have chain armor. And
Frank lets us borrow his sometime.
And we've talked to Frank about this quite a bit, and he has pointed out that wearing chain armor on a regular basis, 12 hours a day, is not something that he would have done back in the day.
He's got some real back issues.
Yes.
And Last thing about trails, helmets are also not something that you would be wearing while you're traversing down a trail. Imagine Frank's big bucket helmet. You've got that on. You've just got two tiny eye slits that you can see through. That's for protecting your head when there are people swinging things at your head. But if you're walking through the forest, you're going to do more damage to yourself because you're not going to see a rock and you're going to trip and fall down the mountain and die.
And so you're going to, not only is it going to be dangerous for you, in other words, taking away hit points for your character, again, it's going to make you exhausted because you're going to be constantly tripping over roots, you're going to be knocking your head against overhanging branches, and you're going to have to deal with being exhausted because you're getting up in heavy armor. So, as Alexander's saying, you're not going to be wearing that armor all the time. If you want to have some reality in your D&D, don't let, number one, don't let your, as a DM, don't let your characters wear their armor all the time. But as a player,
recognize that you're not going to be.
Exactly, and put that into the game as a player just to make the entire thing more realistic. Anyway, let's move on.
On to the next location.
But as a DM, you don't just want to describe the things that your player characters are going to have to overcome as they make their way through the wilderness or through the forest. You also want to be able to describe things that are pleasant that they're going to come across. And one of the things that you might want to talk about is a babbling brook. But the only way to really talk about a babbling brook and describe it to people is to experience one, or at least to become familiar with a video of one, which is, I guess, one of the reasons why we're out here today. As a DM, it's also a good idea to have an understanding of how bridges go across bodies of water, or how much noise a body of water can make, even something as small as this stream. And then, of course, once you get up above about 10,000 feet, you're going to run out of trees, and you're going to have to describe snow. And in this case, a lava cliff. You never know when you might have to describe something that looks like this.
Now, we've been talking a lot about the difficult aspects of forest, but at the same token, there are also portions of forest that will be very open, and you will be able to traverse more easily than you would have otherwise. It's still not going to be easy, especially if you refuse to take off that darn plate armor. But yeah, sometimes you can just walk along.
You might also have to describe what it's like for your characters to be stuck in a rainstorm.
Fields!